My new book is outlining the insights that you will develop as you start to dig into this whole issue of emotional sobriety and start looking at the things that I challenge you with. And these insights will create some incredible aha moments, and you'll start to weave together this tapestry of emotional sobriety that's going to help you discover new possibilities in your life. We've been looking at how AA's 12 steps help us achieve emotional sobriety. Bill Wilson talked about the fact that if we practice the principles from the AA 12 steps in our daily lives, that we and those about us begin to achieve emotional sobriety. So he was very, very explicit in stating that the purpose of working the 12 steps is to achieve this state of emotional sobriety. So that's what we've been doing. We started with step 1 and we've been working our way through, and we're currently have been examining step number 8, which has made a list of all the people that we have harmed and become willing to make amends to them all. Well, I just wanted to say a few things about what we talked about in the latter part of the meeting last week, is understand that this step is not about making amends yet. It's a preparation to make amends. And this is very important because some people were getting so ambitious and talking already about making amends when they were talking about step 8. And step 8 is not about making amends. It's creating an attitude, a perspective that would support us to make amends. And it's very important to think about that. Is see, we have to be able to support ourselves if we're going to change our new behavior. The mistake I see so many people making when they go to change something in their life that's not working is they don't lay a proper foundation for themselves. And the proper foundation for ourselves to make amends is just to have the right attitude in going into this whole, what I like to think of as an adventure of facing people that we've hurt and making amends to them, which we will be doing in step 9. But step 8 is about getting the right headspace, right? Holding the right space to be able to do that. Now, before we talked about, making that list of people we've harmed, and we've talked about, becoming willing. Tonight, I want to focus specifically on the harm part of this. What does it mean to harm someone? And, I was very, very taken at the NA meeting I attended last night in a little town called Newtown. And how NA really emphasizes in the beginning of the meeting is the importance of taking responsibility in our recovery. And they talk about taking responsibility in recovery for those people that we've hurt. And they say, and the first person that's on that list is ourselves. We've harmed ourselves. So this week, I want to talk about the harm we've done to ourselves. Next week, I want to talk about the harm we do to other people. And I want to talk about the harm we do to ourselves in the context of understanding what self-hate is. I don't think many of us have thought about hurting ourselves in the context of, if I'm hating myself, I'm hurting myself. Somehow self-hate gets excluded from that discussion about self-harm, which I think is a mistake. I think that we hurt ourselves terribly with self-hate, and it has many, many, many different different manifestations in our life. And I hope to start to explore those and encourage you to start looking at this issue in your own life. One of my resources for what I'm going to talk to you about tonight comes from Dr. Theodore Isaac Rubin. He was actually one of us, and he was in the fellowship. I believe he was in OA, if I'm not mistaken. He also was very good friends with Dr. Karen Horney, who I really respect a lot, her work, and I'll be mentioning her tonight too. She was a psychoanalyst, what we call a neo-Freudian. And so let me start by how he defined self-hate. Okay, so this is the definition of self-hate from Dr. Theodore Isaac Rubin. He says that self-hate is any thought, any feeling or action based on any combination of false beliefs. So it's any thought, feeling, or action based on any combination of false beliefs, which in any direct or indirect way detracts from, depletes, denigrates, or hurts that which is real and actual about oneself. I'll say that again. It's any combination of false beliefs which in any direct or indirect way detracts from, depletes, denigrates, or hurts that which is real and actual about oneself. Any behavior of this nature must be considered as part of the self-hating process. So I'll say it once again to really let it sink in. Any combination of false beliefs, which in any direct or indirect way detracts from, depletes, denigrates, or hurts that which is real and actual about oneself. Well, we've talked a lot about emotional dependency, or what I call environmental support. So the belief that things have to be a certain way for me to be okay is a part of the self-hating process. So let me say that again. My belief that life has to conform to my expectations for me to be okay is a part of hating myself. It's putting me down. It depletes, it denigrates, it hurts that which is real about me, because it says I'm not capable of supporting myself, that I need things to be a certain way to be okay. Now, I don't think many of us think of our emotional dependency as self-hate, but we need to start to connect it to that process. Because when we start to look at this issue of making amends, which will be including ourselves, obviously, based on the discussion tonight, we need to start seeing that part of making amends to ourselves is to start to really get a hold of and become aware of our self-hate and the self-hating process that's operating in our lives. So I extend this to say any act or idea which interferes with or impairs our self-realization and our self-actualization also must be considered a part of the self-hating process. Now, what are some of the characteristics of this? Well, self-hate creates a distortion of self, right? We don't have an accurate picture. Remember what humility was, right? When we defined it early on in this process, was an accurate, not an over or underestimation or underestimate of our success and our worth. While self-hate creates a distortion of self in either one or two directions, either in terms of a degradation of ourself or an idealization of self. Remember, Thom Rutledge called it what? Negative arrogance. I love that term. That's how Thom referred to it. So any rejection of our actual self is therefore self-hating. So if I have an exaggerated self-opinion, I am rejecting my actual self. I'm not saying that I'm not good enough the way I am. Relentless criticism of myself is an act of self-hate. Living a life based on a set of shoulds is a rejection of me. Saying I need these principles outside of myself to govern my life. I don't have the ability to critically think about who I want to be and the kind of values I want to live with. So I accept these shoulds uncritically. A rejection or denial of any reality is self-hate. Minimizing or ignoring our abilities is self-hate. Now, we typically experience self-hate in a very much dichotomous way. I do something and I hate myself for what I've done. I'm ashamed of it. I beat myself up. But the truth is that self-hate is like a constant undercurrent that at times peaks up and it then therefore looks like it's dichotomous, but it's just an eruption of the volcano that's always living underneath the surface. Now, I said I would mention some of Dr. Karen Horney's work, and I will say a few things about her, and then I will turn this over to Roger and Thom to continue the discussion of how we harm ourselves with this. So Dr. Horney was a neo-Freudian, which meant that instead of looking at sex as driving everything, and of course it takes a woman to shift perspective about this, is she looked at relationships as having the most powerful influence on our lives, not sex. And she specifically looked at our desire to be loved, to be accepted, and to belong as having an incredibly powerful force in shaping who we are. I think she is one of the unheralded geniuses of the 20th century, in my opinion. But she said this, she goes, patients for whom self-hatred is in the foreground present an attitude of self-minimizing. I like that term she uses, self-minimizing, self-accusing, and self-frustrating, with a resulting low self-confidence, feelings of having no rights, and being unwanted and worthless. So they present with an attitude of self-minimizing, self-accusing, and self-frustrating, always interfering with what they would like to do and not being able to do what they want, which creates low self-confidence, feelings of having no rights, being unwanted and worthless. She goes, because of their self-hatred, they long for or demand as their right love, support, and company, often as a projections against their own vindictive self-hatred and despair. So remember what I said before. If in our childhood, as Dr. Lowen observed, that we experience a trauma that threatens our emotional security or self-acceptance, we are going to imagine and require and demand that our future reverse that experience of our past. And you can really see how that manifests itself in terms of what Dr. Horney was saying about how that self-hatred turns into demands that you've got to love me. You've got to make me feel better about myself. You've got to give me what I'm not able to give myself, which I don't think I can even give myself, which is also part of that self-hating process that we're talking about. So this becomes a critical issue in terms of us achieving emotional sobriety. So in one way, we can now say that the achievement of emotional sobriety is dependent on us beginning to resolve our self-hatred. Well, how do we do that? Well, we've been talking about a lot of ways of doing this, and we'll continue to talk about it, but I'm just reminded of the discussion that Dr. McGee continues to bring in here about self-acceptance, right? And the power of loving ourselves. And you can see how important that becomes in terms of an antidote to this self-hate. Now, the other thing that it talks about is that we need to identify these false beliefs. Because when we live a life that's based on a set of these false beliefs, it's very hard to have an attitude towards ourselves that is based on who we really are or our actual or true self. So also a very important part of this work of emotional sobriety is identifying the myths, the mythology that's governing our life. The ideas we have about who we are, who we should be, how we ought to act, how life should be, need to be challenged, and challenged in a very, very, very deep way. Now, if you are anything like me, you start looking at this and go, my God, what an order. I can't go through with it. Anybody hear that phrase before? We've heard it a few times in the program. Well, this is a big deal. This is a lot of stuff to bite off and to start to struggle with and to deal with. And, it always begins with just increasing our awareness. Dr. Nathaniel Brandon, which you've heard me and Roger mention many, many times in this, says, just think about increasing your awareness by 5%, just 5%. If you brought 5% more awareness to this self-hating process and identifying it in your life, well, what would that mean? Well, I think this is a case where a very small percentage can have a very huge impact, right? Where can with one rose you get a whole rose garden? Well, right here in emotional sobriety land, that's where you can, with one rose, you can get a whole rose garden. Because that's what happens is you just take a little bit of a change in this direction and start looking at this. It's going to start revealing a lot of very, very important things in your life that we can now begin to start turning around and develop some self-compassion, because that is really the antidote here, right? Is to have a new, healthier relationship with ourselves. And Bill defines that in the beginning of that letter that Brian reads from, that he says that emotional sobriety is real maturity and balance in our life, which is to say humility in relationship to ourself. So when we start to develop this humility, it will move us towards a position of self-compassion because we get more aligned with the reality of who we are. Well, enough said about that. Let me turn this over to my two distinguished colleagues.
I think it's me and Roger. I don't know who you're talking about, but
well, my distinguished colleagues will be.
It's just us. It's just us, Tom.
That's
okay. It's okay. We can just be us.
Yeah, we're just demonstrating the self-hating process.
That's right. It's like when the Three Stooges.
It's false humility, and it's just really self-hate.
Roger and I know we were talking earlier today about how distinguished we are. We know that. Roger, if it's okay, I'm just biting at the bit here to go. Is it okay?
Go for it, Tom.
All right.
Go for it.
I have a friend named Bendel Wilson who died several years ago suddenly. He practiced what Robert Fulghum, the man who wrote Everything I Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten, called positive vandalism. and he would plant rose bushes in people's gardens and people's yards. You know, he would. So when Bindle, a lot of people asked him eventually, but if you didn't ask him, he was going to do it anyway. So it's. It's like, so there were at his memorial several years ago, there were so many stories about his roses, and I had never had the slightest interest in gardening, but and I did consider the fact that he was possibly trying to possess me a little bit after that, because I began to do yard work, but what I did is I planted what I call Bendel's garden, and it just started with a couple of rose bushes. And and I'm no expert, but I love planting things now, and I love rose bushes. And this year, as I was trimming and doing these things, it goes right to what Alan was talking about, only we're going to pull it out of the metaphor and take it into the literal. I looked at these stems I was cutting from the rose bushes and said, I wonder what would happen if I just stuck this down in the soil and just kept watering it and nurturing it. And it's like, not all of them make it. But I've got 2 small rose bushes now that have begun from a stem that I just cut off, stuck down into some good soil, kept it watered. And so I love that you brought that up as a metaphor, Alan, because I thought, no, that's a great way. You say, 5%, a little can go a long way. And and the key to it, as far as I can tell, is a little bit of luck. So we'll call that God in this particular thing. But it's like, we'll see, there may be other factors at play. But it's that when I stick that stem, and basically I'm sticking a stick in the ground and deciding I want it to be a rose bush. What makes the difference is I attend to it. I believe it's possible. And so this is the thing I want to say. There's so many things I could say about what you're talking about there. It's like, but what I want to say is I have this little 5-point motivation checklist thing that is dissatisfaction, desire to change, belief that change is possible, belief that you deserve it, and willingness to do what it takes. The third point in that is the one that gets tapped the most. The deservingness does too, but is where people break down with this self-hatred, and that is we don't even get frustrated about not being able to take care of ourselves or be good to ourselves, because a lot of times we don't even know that's an option. We don't even know it's an option. So I look at that stem. I never occurred to me that I could do something like that. But when it did occur to me, I decided to try something. And that's what we're doing here. We're giving something a try. And it's like a little goes a long way. And it's like, and it doesn't take all that much. We just, I'm mixing stories here, but we have a couple of ducks right now who have what's called bumblefoot, which I think is a fun word to say, but a bad thing to have if you're a duck. But we were, my wife is so good with these, and she was we had them both in my bathtub earlier today, because they're letting them soak their feet in hot water, and she was putting this Epsom salt ointment on there, and we were talking about just the idea that just holding it on there for a little while, because with a duck you really can't bandage it up and leave it that way for long, but just holding it on there for a little while, it's going to get into the system. It's going to begin to work, or maybe an antibiotic can work that way. That's what I was thinking about today. I was using the things I'm thinking about literally in my life as metaphors for what you're talking about, Alan, and that's it. And lastly, I want to say I am definitely one of the people that you're talking about when you said I jumped the gun on talking about the 8th step as if we're making amends. It's like, because that's where I went. And and so if I was misleading anybody with that, I apologize, because I love being reminded tonight that preparing my intrapersonal relationship, my relationship with myself, for this process, which is going to be a very difficult process, even if people aren't even responding, just as I address the things I have in the 12 and 12, they call it the purposeful forgetfulness that we have, that is the problem. As we decide to wake up and remember, it's hard, it's tough to look at ourselves and remember what we've done that has been harmful to other people. I love that we start tonight with talking about ourselves and being sure that we're steady and that we're on our own side to begin with.
Well, you just reminded me of another part of this, because if I don't get a handle on that and I go to make amends,
Yeah, yeah.
what happens if that amend is rejected? Right?
Yeah,
If
yeah.
it
I'm in
doesn't,
danger is what happens. I may be okay. I may be able to pull it off with the right support, but I'm in danger. It's no
I'm
doubt
in
about it.
danger, because now I'm going to internalize all that and it's going to, my self-hate is going to have a field day with that.
Yeah, I told you so inside. I
Oh
told
my
you. I
God,
told you.
that second guesser, that I told you so guy. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
he's gonna rake me over the coals. And trust me, I mean, if that process, see, self-hate spawns what we call an anti-self. And I'm not going to spend too much time on that today, but if my anti-self grows and becomes dominant in my personality, my risk for suicide becomes great, because that part says the world would be better off without you here. You'd be better off if you weren't here. The pain will stop. It'll be all over. And it's time to just check out of this thing. The anti-self can campaign for suicide very, very convincingly.
Well, it's what it says is it's not possible. Hopelessness is what
It
takes us
says
to
that
suicide. It believes it's not possible. And see what we're learning and what we're talking about throughout this whole process. But in today, what you're talking about, getting prepared, is about understanding that's why I thought about the motivation thing. It's like we have to understand that things that we have not previously known were possible are possible.
Yes, right on. That's a great way to say it. And that's another way of thinking about emotional sobriety, is that we have a shift in our perspective. I say it's like we illuminate things and see things in such a different light.
Yep.
But let's see what Roger has to say about all.
Yeah, let's see.
Let's see. Oh, that's me. Okay.
That's a cue.
Gosh,
That's your cue.
a lot of
Roger,
thoughts.
enter stage right.
Thank you. Thank you. So many things come up, so I'll just try to hit on two or three briefly. One of the things I noticed as I got into my late teens and early 20s, as I was casting about for people I could be, right, that I thought would help me feel better about myself or bring other responses from other people, I just ran up against all kinds of beliefs about myself that I had formed. And the piece I want to say about that is we hear and take in, but we also base a lot of our beliefs just on how people treat us, right? Not so much on what's said by mom or dad about, oh, you're so stupid, or you're so smart, or, you're so attractive, or you're so unattractive, or whatever. I think we form a lot of beliefs about ourselves based on how others treat us, even more so very often than what's actually said to us. But one of the ironies of that is when we, what we call internalize or introject those beliefs, we lose awareness of them, because we're not able as children, when we take them in, to go, well, is that true or not? I mean, especially if it's our parents or adults that are treating us in ways that foster these negative beliefs about ourselves, or in some cases, like Alan mentioned, foster grandiosity or an exaggerated sense of self-importance. They're both fundamentally based on a lack of a sense of self, whether it's a real diminished sense of who I am or a highly exaggerated sense of who I am. The core of that is really low self-esteem and a really negative self-concept. But unless I can figure out ways to begin to challenge some of those beliefs, those ideas about me and images of me that we call our self-concept, they can literally dictate my entire life. And Nathaniel Branden, in his books on self-esteem, writes about that. Self-concept is destiny, he wrote. Self-concept is destiny if we allow it to be. So, and another irony of this is, if I don't start to question those beliefs, and we can do a lot of this on our own, just using the technique that Nathaniel Branden, was very famous for. It's called the sentence completion technique, or the incomplete sentence technique, or even the Brandon sentence technique, is, one false belief that I formed about myself as a kid was, and then you write that root or stem, and then you write 6 to 10 endings that come to mind. Don't need to be true, don't need to make sense. First ending that comes to mind, you write it, you let it go, you write the next ending that comes to mind. One way I exaggerate my importance at times is by. One way I diminish my importance at times is by. And you can start to look at these sentences, and his books on self-esteem, including Honoring the Self and the 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem and How to Raise Your Self-Esteem, are loaded with these kinds of incomplete sentences that allow us to begin to develop what? To begin to develop awareness, as Alan was just saying, of a lot of these false beliefs about ourselves that we've never even begun to question. And here's another kicker with this. To the extent I form these false beliefs and then I turn them into either disappearing and withdrawing in life or into demands of others around me, I can demand all the acceptance I want. I can demand all the love that I want. I can demand the compliance with my wishes that I want. But if I'm still harboring those beliefs about myself, I'm unworthy, I don't deserve it, I can seek all of that I want from outside of me, and I won't be able to let one iota of it in. It won't be able to make any difference for me. So we're stuck in this terrible bind, right? Where we're grasping and manipulating and trying to get what we want and trying to get what we want. And yet somehow it never hits the mark. Or we'll gravitate toward people that subconsciously we realize don't have anything to offer us, right? But we're more familiar with that, so we gravitate toward that. So unless I start to become aware of and take ownership of what my beliefs are, and then start to look at alternatives to those, it's very easy for me to stay stuck in a cycle of self-hatred, as Alan talks about. So I don't want to go on further with this, but I really appreciate the direction you're taking with this, Al, about focusing on self-hatred and making amends to ourselves first. And then obviously the other piece is very important too, about making amends to others we have harmed. But so many of the ways we get stuck are about our intrapersonal process, our within our person process, much more so by the time we're adults than our interpersonal process. So I'll let it go at that. Thank you.
I just want to echo, just say amen to the part where no matter if you don't do this preparation, it doesn't matter what you get coming in towards you. A lot of us have had that stuff coming in for a long, long time. It just bounces off. It really does. We're like Superman with bullets. It's like it just bounces right off.
My new book is outlining the insights that you will develop as you start to dig into this whole issue of emotional sobriety and start looking at the things that I challenge you with. And these insights will create some incredible aha moments, and you'll start to weave together this tapestry of emotional sobriety that's going to help you discover new possibilities in your life.